And then the deeper I dove into it, I was like, ugh, there's some really gross stuff in here. I mean, particularly, there are so many stories in the Bible, particularly from the Old Testament, but not just from the Old Testament, from the New Testament as well, that we hide or that we don't talk about or that we don't preach. That is really troubling. I'm kind of beginning to have this crisis of faith, if you will, that
I've created a 4-month course for my Pay What You Can Roots to Samadhi community that I'll be running from August through November. We're going to be deep diving into the practical aspects of how to develop a deep, tangible spiritual connection. Check the description box to learn more.
So I guess we'll start. I'll just ask you to share a little bit of your background because you were a minister at one point in time, and whatever you want to share about that part of your life and coming out of that.
Yeah, sure. So I was raised on a farm. I was raised in rural America. So my mom, drug us to church. I would tell people that I came to Christ through a drug problem. Mom drug us to Sunday school. She drug us to youth group retreats. She drug us to church and all of that stuff. So I was just in the habit of going to church, and it was a Methodist church. It wasn't really like what I would call a fundamentalist church, although we did have a pretty fundamentalist pastor early on when I was young. So some of my beginning impressions of God and the Bible and church was pretty legalistic and hardcore. And we were a middle-class family, did pretty well. My dad was a businessman. He was a successful businessman. And when I was 16 years old, his business failed. And literally overnight, 24 hours, we went from prospering to having literally no money in the bank account, having to sell off stuff, having to sell off livestock and things like that. Bank ended up foreclosing on my dad's business, on my dad's, on our home. And so that was pretty shocking. That was really traumatic for the whole family. And that was right before my senior year in high school. So after my senior year of high school, I left home and went to college, and everybody I ran into somehow when I was in college was this radical Christian believer. Not what I expected from my college experience, especially coming out of trauma and just wanting to get away from home and stuff like that. And so when I was 18, I felt what we would call a calling to ministry and that kind of thing. And so I gave my life over to that, so much so that I dropped out of college and started to pursue opportunities at Bible college or whatever, preparing myself for ministry. Got my first job in ministry, my first paid job in ministry at 18 years old, working for a Methodist church. And then just did all kinds of stuff in ministry until I was 30 years old. And then when I was 30, we planted a church. And incidentally, we ended up buying the building from the Methodist church that I had worked for on my first job. So that was our first building that we purchased. We started from scratch. And it became pretty prosperous and successful over about a 15-year time period. So by the time I reached just right before my 45th birthday, we had won several community awards for excellence. I had done radio. I'd traveled extensively nationally and internationally. I'd done conferences. I'd spoken to large crowds. I'd done crusades. We ran a lay counseling center out of our church that was very successful. We saw hundreds of people that were healed, and back then we would say set free. Incidentally, we were, I wouldn't call us Pentecostal, and I wouldn't really call us charismatic. And I don't know your viewership that much, but we were a part of what they call the third wave movement. So we believed in the gifts of the Spirit, healing, miracles. We saw tremendous supernatural things, signs and wonders, things that to this day I sit back that just blow me away. And that's part of what opened up a lot of traveling opportunities and ministry opportunities and stuff like that. So we were very familiar with what we would call the supernatural. In fact, one of the things that I did was I went around to various churches and trained teams how to minister what we call the gifts of the Spirit, healing, prophecy, words of knowledge, that kind of stuff. And then through this process also, one of the things that I discovered was that I'd already gotten my degree in theology, had a Bible degree, but I realized that, all the Bible knowledge in the world didn't prepare me to help people with real life problems. I remember being 30 years old and just being inundated with people coming and talking about stuff that I had no idea people went through. I had no idea how to help them. And it just felt, even back then, a little shallow and hollow, if I can say that, to tell them, well, just read the scriptures, come to church, pray, everything will be all right. And I was so bad at counseling that I decided to go back in 2005 and get another bachelor's degree in psychology. And then I ended up getting a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling. And that's how we ended up running a lay counseling center out of our church. But one of the things that happened to me especially when I was in graduate school, was I began to learn, things about psychology, social psychology, mental and emotional health and well-being. And I began to realize so much of what we do, and by we, I meant myself and the groups that I interacted with, was really psychologically and emotionally unhealthy. And that probably started about 2010. So about 2010, I started getting into, I started looking at the current church systems and structures that I was a part of, started looking at the doctrines and the beliefs that we believed, and I became very disillusioned with that. So I started going back and studying. I started with some of the early church fathers. I went through a season where I studied all the mystics of the church in depthly. And then ultimately that led me into biblical scholarship. And so as I began to study biblical scholarship and really dig into the Bible and really find out what the Bible said, there was such a disparity between what was actually in the book and what we were practicing and doing. And then the deeper I dove into it, I was like, there's some really gross stuff in here. I mean, particularly, there are so many stories in the Bible, particularly from the Old Testament, but not just from the Old Testament, from the New Testament as well, that we hide or that we don't talk about or that we don't preach, that is really troubling. And so I'm kind of beginning to have this crisis of faith, if you will, that goes, all the way back to 2010. And then in August of 2016, right before my 45th birthday, something just began to feel off and wrong. And all I can say is that there was a shift that happened inside of me. And I kind of woke up. This is how I explain it to people. I kind of woke up on my 45th birthday, very accomplished, had a full preaching schedule, making not tons of money, but, good money, and, winning awards every year in best place of worship. They had a category which I think is really corny, but it was called best mover and shaker in the city, various different things like that. And I had a full schedule as far as traveling internationally to places, connected with impactful and significant ministries in the countries that we were working in. But I woke up and I realized, I guess I would explain it in three ways. I got to the point that I guess I burned out, because it felt like, metaphorically speaking, I would go to the cupboard to give out to people and the cupboard was bare. So that was the first thing. The second thing I realized was that I had created this image of me as a minister, or people even had created an image or had an image of me as a minister that I was trying to live up to and trying to maintain, which was really sort of a cardboard cutout version of myself. It really didn't fit me. And then the third thing I would say is that it felt like I had spent 20 years climbing a ladder of success in ministry, if you will, only to get to the top of the ladder and realize it was leaning against the wrong building. So that sparked quite a crisis for me. So after that happened, I went through a season of a few months. In fact, we even got away on a sabbatical and got completely away from our hometown, away from everything, my family and I. And when we did that through a series of crazy synchronicities, we started connecting with people, meeting people who were very spiritual, who were very supernatural in their lifestyle, but they didn't adhere to any of our beliefs or labels or behaviors. And so that was quite confusing. So that kind of put what we call deconstruction for me on hyperdrive. And so just to bring you up to current, long story short, we ended up transitioning out of what I would call, the Christian third wave movement that we were a part of. And now we're running what I would call a holistic healing center, where we're providing services and doing teachings and stuff here locally, as well as, some of what I'm able to do on YouTube and platforms like this.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Aaron. And there's so much that I would love to ask you, but I think I'll start with this. So I know from listening to your Facebook Lives and other things that you put out that you still very much believe in, I'm not sure what word is the best, but the supernatural, because
Right.
of all those experiences that you had. And I would love to hear your explanation on what that is and what conclusion have you come to with that?
Yeah. So you're starting with the easiest question first, right?
Right.
Yeah, I won't lie. I went through a extremely difficult deconstruction. Someone wrote a book, like I forget the author's name, but it's called Religious Trauma Syndrome. And one of the things the author says in there is that, when you start to change your beliefs, you think it's going to be as easy as like giving up a belief in Santa Claus, or we're coming up on Easter, maybe a belief in the Easter Bunny, right? But what I realized was that my entire sense of self, my entire worldview, my entire, all of my decisions had been made. Really, Melissa, if I could be honest, a lot of the decisions were made externally for me. Because even though we didn't dive fully into the Bible, and there were parts of the Bible that we didn't even know existed, or that we never preached or talked about or read, our kind of our mantra was, well, if God said it in the Bible, I believe it, that settles it. And so all my decisions were being dictated to me from without, either from the scriptures or being involved with like a council, what we would call a council of elders, or people that were further down the road in ministry than I was. And I would go to them for advice and counsel, and whatever counsel or advice they gave me, I would take. And so that's how I ended up in this sort of constrictive environment for myself, because I never operated, and I hope people listen to this carefully. I never operated in true integrity. And what I mean by that was, I wasn't out deceiving people or lying or mishandling finances or having scandals, anything like that. But what I was doing wasn't coming from within an authentic place within me. I was making all of my decisions from some source outside of myself. And so that's why, at 45, it's like, man, I feel totally emotionally disconnected from this stuff. So for me, everything was on the table. Atheism was on the table. Secular humanism was on the table, all this stuff. And I could become intellectually convinced of atheism, evolution, secular humanism, but what I couldn't do was forget about all the incredible experiences that we had that really produced fruit. And by producing fruit, what I mean is people genuinely got healed. People genuinely, their lives genuinely changed. And so it wasn't like this sort of airy-fairy where we think we're doing something supernatural, but we really aren't. There was fruit that was happening in the practical day-to-day. And I remember ready to just give up on all of it. And I was really wrestling with the decision. I'd already taken a part-time job as a professional counselor. I knew I could transition financially into professional counseling. And I was ready to just walk away from everything. And I go to church one Sunday morning, and one of the greeters comes up to me and says, "Pastor, there's a woman here from Australia that wants to meet you." And I'm like, what? Yeah, she came from Australia to meet you. And I thought, okay, she didn't come from Australia to meet me. We're just south of Colorado Springs. At that time, Colorado Springs still had, mega churches and conferences and things like that. And so I thought, probably came in for a conference or something and seen me on YouTube or something and just drove down. So I go to meet this lady, and she just begins to tell me her story right there, in our church foyer, and just begins to tell me about how she was raised in a really toxic, well, not raised, but her teenage years, her family converted to sort of fundamentalism Christianity, and became this really toxic environment where she was locked in a room and forced to memorize scriptures and forced to pray certain hours a day and whatever. And of course, she rebelled against that. And the way that she rebelled was she went into psychedelics, and got into shamanism and the New Age movement, trying all these various different spiritual paths, and was estranged from her family. And so what she said, through your teaching, I was able to heal. My family was able to heal. My family was able to realize some of the toxicity that was in their religious environment. And we found sort of this middle path between the way she was saying it, the spiritual path that I'm on, and the spiritual path that my parents are on. And because of you, I didn't give up my faith in Jesus. And she looked at me. I'll never forget it, Melissa. She looked at me and she said, please, 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 don't stop what you're doing, because there's people out there that really need to hear your voice. And that rattled me, obviously. So she had literally climbed on an airplane and flown to Colorado just to give me that message.
Wow.
So yeah, so that rattled me a little bit. I was like, okay, I need to work with this. But I think because of wounding and trauma and stuff that we went through with public ministry, I couldn't get my heart into it, right? And so if I would have just out of the gate, and I'm getting to your question, I promise. Because I guess what I'm trying to say is I was at the point, I didn't know what to believe. I didn't know what to think. Intellectually, I was convinced maybe of atheism. Experientially, I was convinced that there was a greater metaphysical world, a supernatural world. And I just didn't know. I didn't know what to do. So I wanted to just chuck it all and go do mental health counseling. I'll help people. I'll make money, and I'll start my own business, and it'll be good. And then I have this girl show up, and it's like, oh my gosh. And then I remember I went and took a training at this New Age center in Denver on what they called angel Reiki. And this was calling upon angels to minister a life force and minister a healing to people. And there was, and I brought my Christian judgmentalism into the group. And there was a young man there who I thought was a complete flake, I'll be honest with you. I mean, he was talking about UFOs and aliens and being of an alien seed and a star seed and all this stuff. And I'm just like, oh my God. And as a counselor, I'm sitting there thinking, this guy needs medication. I mean, he's hallucinating. He's delusional. So we get paired up at the end of the session, and we lay hands on each other, to minister this angel Reiki. And the moment I did that, I went into a trance, and Jesus appeared in front of me, and Jesus both began to talk to me in my mind and minister to this person. And he just began to weep. You could feel the entire atmosphere in the place just shift. And I began to speak to him the words that I was hearing from this figure of Jesus that had manifested in my vision. And the more I would speak about his life and details and circumstances about his life, the more he would begin to break and cry. And I don't want to share his story, but mind you, it was horrific what was revealed to me and what this man had been through. And when it was all said and done, and he had kind of gathered himself, he looked up at me, and he said, Yeshua was here. And he said, I'll never forget, he looked me square in the eyes and he said, don't you dare quit. Don't you dare hide yourself, because this world needs what you have.
Wow.
So yeah, so those are probably the two main reasons, that and my own experiences, that I couldn't just shift over to complete atheism. I say people, if all they have in their Christian experience is a philosophy of life, a morality of faith, but everything is happening on the natural plane, then more likely than not, when they deconstruct, or if they deconstruct from Christianity, they're going to shift to atheism, which essentially is just another philosophy of life. That would have been easy, but I had to figure out, how do I incorporate all of this stuff? And so here's how I would say it now. I think that Christ, and when I'm talking about Christ, I'm talking about what John is talking about in John's Gospel, chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and all things were made by him, and without him nothing was made that has been made. I'm talking about what the book of Colossians is talking about in Colossians chapter 1, that Christ created all things visible and invisible, and in him all things hold together. And I don't equate Christ, as it's referenced in John chapter 1, or as it's referenced in Colossians chapter 1, necessarily with the human being or the man Jesus, but rather with this conscious, this divine consciousness, this Joseph Murphy calls it the infinite consciousness. Some people call it the divine mind. Greg Braden calls it the divine matrix. That is the energetic and conscious source of all things, that is existing in all things, and who all things are holding together. And so I think this is what John is talking about. I think this is what the author of Colossians is talking about. And so I would say this, that where I'm at right now is I believe that Christ transcends Christianity. And by Christianity, I'm talking about all the forms that we have, the labels that we use. I'm a Christian, I'm not a Christian. We're believers, they're unbelievers. We're saved, they're lost. I'm a Baptist, I'm a Pentecostal. We believe this, the Bible says that. We argue about baptism, we argue about all this stuff, gifts of spirit, all this stuff. And each group kind of thinks they've cornered the market on truth. And what I would say is that this divine consciousness, this divinity, this source of all things, whatever you want to call it, whatever people call it, transcends all of that. And by transcending Christianity, then it becomes all-inclusive, in that everyone comes from that source, and everyone is participating at some level, even atheists, even people that are completely just, this physical world is all there is, and when we die, we just become worm food. Everyone is connected and included as part of an expression of what they call in the Kabbalion the all. Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes so much sense to me. And one of the reasons why I was really drawn to your story when I heard it and your teaching is because I also have a background. Now, my background was in Assemblies of God, charismatic, and I had several miraculous healings and saw countless other people have miraculous experiences. And but I just couldn't deny that these things are happening in other belief systems as well. So it makes so much sense that there's one source behind all of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like the way that you put it into words and describe it.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, back in when we were in the Pentecostal box, I'll just identify with the Pentecostal roots and Assembly of God and all that stuff. Anything supernatural that wasn't in the Bible, or wasn't done in the name of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, was demonic. And so I talked about, when we went on that sabbatical, one of the things that we did was we decided, we like I said, through synchronicities and stuff, we met people that were into different faiths, but were really beautiful people. And in a lot of ways, Melissa expressed Christ likeness in a way that we had never seen in the church. And I remember going to some of these practitioners and scared to death, thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get a demon. I remember being in a group, a circle with these people that met, in this location. And I went and introduced myself, and they're like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, I'm a evangelical pastor. And the look on their face, like their countenance just dropped. And then they caught themselves, you know, and they kind of, oh, well, we're open to people of all faiths here. And so for the first time, I felt that kind of exclusion, you know, that people probably felt from Christians. And so they said, well, here's how we operate. But at the end of the meeting, we walk around and we lay hands on people and we give them a Diksha blessing, which Diksha means oneness in Hindi, I think. But they had traveled to India to get this blessing from a guru. And so the meeting starts and they start calling on, you know, they call on Jesus, they call on Mother Mary, all these invisible entities. And then they start calling on things I never heard of before. I don't even remember, Abba Baba, or, you know, whatever it was. I'm just like, oh God, I was so uncomfortable and so nervous. And then it was like, you know, just kind of uneasy. What am I going to do? They said, if you don't want us to lay hands on you when we're coming by, just raise your hand and we'll pass you up. And as they're getting closer, Melissa, I can feel this loving, peaceful energy, like getting closer, like they're carrying a presence, they're carrying an energy. And I wanted to experience, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, well, if I get a demon, I know a lot of deliverance ministers that can cast it out. And so I didn't raise my hands. They lay their hands on me, and I felt so much peace. I felt the presence of God, which I had felt thousands of times in my life. It felt the same. It felt like the same presence. It felt like the same energy. And it brought so much peace to my heart. And while after they had laid their hands on me, again, my eyes were open kind of in the spirit, and I had this vision. And I saw these other entities, whatever they were, floating around. And there's Jesus, right? And I look at Jesus, and honestly, I felt bad, Melissa. I felt like maybe I had betrayed or denied the faith. And in my heart, I just poured that out. I just said, Lord, I don't want to be unfaithful to you. I don't want to be disloyal to you. And I'll never forget it. The Lord spoke to me again in my mind and said, you've really been looking for a path of healing. And you've been looking for living water. And he quoted a verse from Jeremiah, in broken cisterns that can hold no water. And I saw that every system that I had participated in, and all my search, looking at the ancient mystics, the early church fathers, the Eastern Orthodoxy, all these things, trying to find the one true faith, right? And I could see in that moment of time, they were all kind of broken cisterns that could hold no water. And I had so much peace, like, this is okay. And as a result of that, I began to become more loving. I began to become more compassionate, more peaceful, more joyful, all of what we would call the fruit of the Spirit, right? So if Jesus said, you'll know them by their fruits, then I could not, with integrity and authenticity, sit there and say, well, they must be doing this by the power of Beelzebub.
If you don't mind, I'd like to switch gears and ask you about something you said early on. When you became a counselor, you said that you began to recognize some of the things that were taught in religion. And I don't remember the way that you worded it, so you can correct me, but maybe they aren't the most healthy for people. Right. Would you like to share what some of those are?
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. The first thing that I noticed was I had to write a paper on groupthink. And groupthink is an interesting thing. It's a social psychology phenomenon that looks at why organizations fail. And one of the reasons organizations fail, either they go backwards and fail and cease to exist, or they don't make any progress forwards, is because they get locked into groupthink. Now, groupthink is defined as a strong leader who is charismatic and at the top of the pyramid, so to speak, and then a group of people around them that will only think like the leader thinks. And any voice outside of that, any thought outside of that, that's not part of the already established philosophies, any challenges, any questions, you're immediately removed from the group. And I thought, oh my God, that's my church and every organization I've ever been a part of. I mean, I knew guys in churches that would try to tell people what books they could read and what books they couldn't read, what leaders or pastors they could listen to and what leaders and pastors they couldn't listen to. And then I started, and so I began to look at that and say, that's really unhealthy. And I experienced that myself because, going through burnout, I went to a psychologist for evaluation. I went to a counselor. I wanted to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. I was trying to get help. Through all that time, even with people that I opened up to, that I thought would pray for me and be there for me, that I'd walked with for years, decades, some of them, acted like I had the plague. But they didn't excommunicate me. And what I mean by that was they just left me alone. They still talk to me, still interact with me, but never on, hey, how's it going? Or any issues of substance. And the moment I came out and said, I no longer believe in hell as a place that people go into eternal conscious torment, that was the end for me. I remember I put it out on Facebook. It was like, I felt like I was coming out of the closet spiritually, right? And I mean, within a day, my inbox was loaded. I was getting text messages. Oh my God, brother, we're praying for your soul, And so what I realized was you can almost do anything in some of these churches. You can steal, lie, cheat, whatever, multiple sexual partners, wife swapping. I mean, and that stuff does go on in churches, by the way. People don't know because they don't ever get to that level where they meet their heroes and like personally. But I can tell you right now, some of the people that are heroes, it ain't very pretty behind the scenes. And you can do all that and they're going to love you and accept you. But the moment you break with the groupthink, you're out. So that's the first thing. The second thing, and this is even more important, is every doctrine from the book of Romans, Galatians, Ephesians, 1 Corinthians, the Gospels. We like to pick on the Old Testament, but let's look at the New Testament. Teaches some form of self-rejection, self-denial, and mental and emotional repression. And when there's parts of us that we don't want to deal with, whether it is what we would call unholy desires, whether it is traumas from our past, whether it is the full spectrum of the human experience, which includes anger, which includes jealousy, which includes hate, we repress those things. We're told those things are bad. Those things are evil. Those things, you need to kill those things. You need to crucify those things. In spiritual circles today, we call it the ego, or we call it the lower nature, but it's the same system. It's the same thing. We just use different language to talk about it, but you get the same end result, which is ultimately disowning parts of yourself, disowning parts and dehumanizing the human experience and suppressing things. Now, when you do that, you can hide it from yourself, but it doesn't go away. It will morph, it will change. It may show up as high blood pressure. It may show up as back and neck pain. It may show up as digestive problems in your physical body, or it may show up as irritability. It may show up as being passive aggressive. It may show up as depression or anxiety, but those things never go away. And that's something that we understand in the clinical mental health community. That's what we do. We help people recover those parts, those repressed parts, heal them and integrate them. And I think the Taoists have it the best because the Taoists are looking for balance. They're not looking to just be love and light or just be spirit beings, but they're looking for the balance of that. And so part of my spiritual quest has led me to this place of fully embracing humanity in all of its mess, all of its brokenness, all of its pain, all of its what we call evil, where we do things to other people that are harmful and hurtful, and we have urges to do those things, to embrace all of it and show up for all of it and experience all of it. And rather than transcending it, bringing the spiritual resources that we can access into those places so that they can be healed and integrated, and ultimately we can find our balance. So my goal is not to walk in the light. My goal is to live in the twilight.
And that's something that I've really had to learn the hard way, because being raised in my religious background and then getting into New Age circles, which is something I've heard you talk about too, that you have some criticisms of some of the things that are taught in those circles.
Mhm.
I've had a real tendency in my life to suppress anything quote unquote negative.
Mhm.
And so that's where your teaching has been really grounding for me.
Yeah, it's an important principle. We're here. I mean, let's take a New Age paradigm, right? Belief in reincarnation, belief in, polarities, light and darkness in the world. Um, and we chose to come here. That's what they say. We chose to come here. We came here with a purpose, mission, whatever. We chose to come here. It makes no sense to me at all that if we were existing, and again, I'm using their paradigm, if we were existing in these higher levels of oneness with source, oneness with God, higher levels, you came from the light, from eternity past, why would we come here and not fully embrace the human experience? How is it that we chose to come here, but there's certain aspects of our humanity that we don't embrace?
Right.
And so for me, it's the same. It's again, the author of the Religious Trauma Syndrome book. Oh, no. I take that back. When I was looking at the psychological literature on religious trauma, one of the things they emphasize is spiritual bypassing. And there's a difference between spiritual bypassing and spiritually coping. Spiritually bypassing is suppressing, chasing it away, not wanting to go into the darkness, so to speak, not wanting to feel it, wanting to maintain this high vibration where we never get angry, we never get frustrated, we never get depressed, right? And so what we want to do is we want to just live at this high vibration, not primarily because we don't want to address that stuff. And so this is why it's so appealing. It's why it's so appealing in Christianity and groups like Assembly of God, the groups that I was a part of. And it's also why it's so appealing in the New Age movement, because we have this human tendency. We don't want that side of ourselves. And so it offers us a philosophy or a way to really trick ourselves into avoiding those parts of ourselves. Now, spiritually coping is a different thing altogether. And again, it's what I talked about earlier. It's realizing that there are, I do believe, lots of love and light around, right? Mm-hmm. Lots of healing, lots of peace and joy and all that stuff that we want, that we can access through our spiritual evolution and through our spiritual growth, that then empowers us to embrace our darkness and integrate it so that it becomes part of our experience and part of who we are in this lifetime.
That's so good, Aaron. So do you have any advice for people who may be going through that deconstruction process?
I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy.
Me either. For me, there's like 2 stages of it. You get through the actual deconstruction and then you think you're good. And then you have all the fallout in your personal life, which you think you're handling, and then it hits you and you have to work through all of that.
Boy, that is really important to talk about, Melissa. That is really important to talk about. Because there are 2 phases to this, right? There's your own growth and evolution and freedom, really. Freedom to choose your beliefs, freedom to choose your path, to choose your way of being in the world, which may be contrary in some respects to the groups that you're part of. But the moment you manifest that or talk about that or live that out in the flesh, then you have the social trauma, then you have the social rejection, then you have the literally there is a group of pastors that meets every week, and all they do is critique my posts and pray against what we're doing here.
Oh, wow.
And I just want to say, get a life.
Right.
So there is that aspect to it. I guess my advice would be to go slow with this. Go slow and take your time. And that you're going to be okay. Like, life might be hell for you right now. You might be in confusion, disorientation. Embrace all of that. Like I said before, show up for everything in your life. I mean, it's no different, Melissa. It's no different if back to the spiritual bypassing. The reason people become addicted to substances, the underlying reason that people become addicted to substances, whether it's alcohol or hard drugs or prescription drugs or compulsive behaviors like sexual compulsions, pornography, things like that. The reason is because they don't want to be in, they don't want to be present with their own consciousness.
Mhm.
They don't want to feel those unpleasant feelings. So they look for these escapes. So what happens is spirituality becomes another means of escaping those feelings. I talked a lot about visions and trances. There are people that'll just try to trance out and just try to, go into the higher realms and have these, experiences, when really all they're doing is they're using that like a drug, or they're jumping from meeting to meeting, or from teacher to teacher, or from YouTube channel to YouTube channel, when really all they're doing is they're using that as something to take them away from what's going on in their life. And so, what we tell people who are recovering from substance abuse or addiction, what we tell people that are, recovering from whatever, we tell them is from a mental health perspective, show up for all of it. Be there for the good and the bad. And I guess that's what I would say is like don't run from that pain, don't run from that hurt, don't run from that confusion. Don't be in a hurry because you want it to stop. Just show up for all of it. Sit with those feelings, sit with the confusion, and know that you're okay. Know that you're okay in that moment, even though you're experiencing those things. And then the second thing I would say is, if I can quote Jesus, count the cost before you talk to somebody or express yourself to somebody, or before you make that break, before you sort of come out of the closet, because chances are there's a really good chance everyone in your circle is locked into groupthink. And the moment you break from the groupthink, they may break from you, and you have to be prepared for that. Now, if that doesn't happen, great, good for you. I hope it doesn't happen, but be prepared to stand on your own. And if you don't have that strength, if you're not ready for that, then by all means, take your time.
Thank you for sharing your perspective. I really value your perspective, both as a former pastor, but also as a counselor, and actually understanding what people are going through in here and how to guide them through that process. Aaron, this has been one of the most interesting conversations, one of the best conversations I've ever had. So I'm really, really grateful to you for doing this. Would you like to share with people where they can find you, about your YouTube channel, or anything else that you want to share?
I'm still trying to hide, Melissa.
Okay.
So you can type in Aaron, Aaron, my middle initial, Tomlinson, Tomlinson, into like a YouTube search, and my channel will come up. And I took a 2-year hiatus because I had to figure all this stuff out, because I was still, for the last 2 years, what do I believe? Where am I? What do I think? What are my values? How do I want to express myself? And the more I would put that out, even on smaller platforms, the more chaos I would cause. And so I finally had to pull back from that completely the last few months. And then that really helped me crystallize where I was at. And so I've started doing that again. My goal is to start posting videos at least once a day. My goal right now is to post them at least once a week and get to where I'm posting them once a day. So you can go, if you go to my YouTube channel and subscribe and hit like and all that stuff. And you can check out videos that I've done there. We have a website for our local, what we're doing locally. It's called theawakeningcenter.org. You can go and check that out, although that needs to be updated as well. Where I'm at currently, I'm starting over with this idea of creating a holistic spiritual center where we're teaching people how to recover and how to live healthy lives, and bringing the spiritual component in a balanced way into their lives, but also offering professional counseling, life coaching, and other forms of really cutting edge techniques to help people recover from trauma and depression, anxiety, things like that. So I'm excited about where we're going. But right now it's like a 3-person project, and we're all working full-time jobs. And so it's going a little bit slower than we like, but you can check me out on YouTube, go to the Awakening Center. I have a Facebook page, but I'm not sure if I I can't keep up with the friend requests. So most of it's public. You can find me on Facebook there too. But if you friend request me, don't feel rejected if I don't get to you. That's because you're buried underneath 1,000 other people that have friend requested me that I just haven't got to. So.
All right, perfect. I will have those links in the description.
Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and comment with your thoughts and opinions, and check the description box for the links to my free community where I share lots of resources, my Pay What You Can community where we do classes and challenges together, my TikTok, Instagram, my Clips channel, and lovecoveredlife.com where I share my paintings. Thank you so much for your support.